You are listening to the Techie Leadership Show with Bogdan and Andrei. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Techie Leadership Show. Today we have Vidar Andersen. He likes to fund tech startups to solve his own problems. He also spreads education on building startups to young founders as an advisor, investor, an organizer of early-stage startup support programs, and as a teacher on startup entrepreneurship to students. Besides that, Vidar also helps corporations with innovation and growth through science, plus entrepreneurship through his company, Andersen and Associates. Hello, Mr. Andersen.
Hello there. Great to be here.
Saying the pleasure is ours. So you have like a lot of experience, and it will be like really interesting for us to hear like your perspective on leadership, especially since you're coming like you also have a lot of experience with innovation and the role leadership plays in innovation. But before we get to that, tell us a little more about yourself.
Right. So as many people, I didn't start out to become what I've become. Early in life, I wanted to be a film director and make films. So I started to study film. And in the middle of the studies, I sort of discovered that university sucks. It wasn't for me. And I just had, I was very lucky to have that coincide with when the commercial internet hit Europe. So that was the mid-90s.
Okay.
And since I'd been involved in the hacker and demo scene for many years and knew my ways around computers, and I saw people who were, at least I thought, were stupider than myself, that were making a lot of money with this internet thing, although I had no idea what it was, I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So I just jumped headfirst into it. I was lucky, got a break at a small, I don't know if you'd call it a startup, but a company that was starting up. As I was also part of sort of there in the beginning and when it was starting to grow. So I got an opportunity and made the most out of it. And the rest is sort of history. And also because I sort of got fed up with working for other people from time to time, I also founded my own startups, my own things on and off. There were always some interesting offers. So I went back sporadically to do other jobs for other people. And then, well, basically also when I was working with interesting customers. So it's great jobs, enormous projects, multi-million-dollar projects for governments and big oil and gas publishers and doing all sorts of stuff you can imagine, like in the wild, wild west of the early web, where everything was possible because nobody could tell you how to do it because you had to invent everything yourself. That was pretty great. Sometimes I got tired of working with large corporations or governments, and then I founded my other stuff myself or did something with friends instead. And one of those things in 2001 was Plone, content management system that was quite successful still today. Co-founded with two people. And on and off until 2010, I was working with large corporations. For instance, the last 5 years before 2010, I was the head of digital for the lead agency to T-Mobile internationally, worldwide. So we're doing all the stuff, digital stuff for T-Mobile internationally and telecom worldwide. And at point of sales, for instance. Now, 2010, I had finally had enough. So I just quit being a salaryman for good. And then since then, I've done my own companies, my own startups. One startup of note was like 2011 it started, I think. It was one of the first social local mobile apps. It was called Gauss the People Magnet. It worked exactly like described. It was like a people magnet for your pocket. You could just attach your existing networks. And it was quite freaky because it could then start to recommend people around you that are physically based around you right now that you had something in common with that would be relevant and interesting to you, or shared networks or people or interests. And those people didn't even have to be on our platform. It's a bit freaky at the time. And that took us through a long journey from the front pages of New York Times, CNN, TechCrunch, Numbers Times, until 2.5 years later, I had to sort of pull the plug, and that was like 2 centimeters before personal insolvency. So I know how the roller coaster goes up and down and up and down. and had some successes, had some losses, and also in that period afterwards, in 2013, I founded a company basically based on demand from all my corporate contacts from my past, who were asking me, they were asking because they saw I've been doing startup stuff. They see I've been teaching more and more this Stanford curriculum behind the lean startup movement, the lean launchpad. I've been to Stanford, was sort of trained by Steve Blank, the founder of the lean startup movement, or the grandfather of the lean startup movement, if you will. And they were asking like, can you help us apply this stuff to our innovation efforts? Because like we're not getting anywhere, or we're not getting as fast as we want to, or we're not really having the results that we want to. And of course, the first thing I thought was like, hell no. I don't want
we will not make you more
you.
powerful.
Exactly. I don't want anything to do with you. I know exactly how you operate. I worked with you for 15 years. And then it's like, but we have money. And since I was bankrupt, basically, I was like, when can I start? Let's do this. So yeah, that's how my company that you mentioned, Plus Andersen and Associates, was founded, basically on demand, and also by not refusing taking money from the market, which is basically it's been a good bet so far. It enables me to be independent and do the other things without having to worry too much about getting paid for all the stuff I do for students and startups, and also enabled me to put some money back into early stage startups and founders. So that was a little bit about my background.
Wow,
bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster ride.
Definitely.
Ups and downs. It had like an interesting life.
Yeah.
If it was all only going up, like from my own experience, because my life is also going up and down and up and down. It's interesting, and it really makes you feel like you're living life. Sometimes you wouldn't want to live through some experiences, but
yeah, don't wish it on my worst enemies.
Yeah. Well, it always looks best in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you go through it and you're like, what am I doing with my life?
And it makes for great stories.
True.
And
yeah, it's like when you have like 10
stories.
10 years removed, then it's all fun and games, but it can be quite painful for a while.
So Vidar, with which story would you like to start? Do you want to start with the leadership success story or the leadership failure story? Which one would you think would be like the best progression from one to the other?
Well, I think maybe with the biggest leadership success story that I've witnessed personally, which correlates, or that is to say, which is in the context of the worst or unfortunate that I've also seen, because there were two similar situations where leadership acted completely differently, and the outcome was quite diametrically
different
opposite.
Also. Okay.
Exactly.
And so let's start with the success story.
Right. Now, this is, I'm not talking about like Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs, like epic proportions here. I'm just talking about the first experiences that I had with like business leadership, not speaking about like mental leadership or spiritual leadership or philosophical leadership. I'm just talking I thought I would talk about business leadership and what really helped shape me and influence me when I was starting out in business. Because before that, I'd just been studying and done some freelance consulting basically, and really didn't know shit about business. So let me take you back to, I think I started at least in the beginning of 97, and 1997, like a completely different century. And then I was in this company, which had given me a great break. I just basically sent a blind, applied for a job blindly. There was nothing available, but they were so convinced, and they let me have a break, and I tried to make the best out of it. And this was a company, when I started, there were like 4 or 5 people, and by this time, it was a couple of years in, and we had about 8 or 9 people or something like that, if memory serves. And we had, of course, we had like customers that were governments. There were some of the largest oil and gas companies in the world, big energy providers, big publishers, and so on and so forth. And then something happened, like what usually can happen in a small company's early stage, whereas you have some projects or you have some contracts that just fall through, and you've been sort of betting on these contracts to help sort of make the year and help and make payroll, and then suddenly there was a substantial amount of money lacking to make payroll, where the owners and the leadership, or I think there were 3 founders, they basically said, we'll take the cut. We will put all of our money, all of what we should have and all we will have sort of left to make sure that you get payrolled. We're investing in our employees, in our first employees, and we're going to take this fall. We're responsible for you. We've asked you to join, and we're the ones who own the company and stand to gain. So basically what they did was be super transparent and say, basically, here's the deal. We're taking the hit for you, and because they felt it was self-evident that they were the people who were supposed to bear it, because they stand the most to gain as stockholders.
Yes.
So they did, and everybody stayed because everybody thought that was a very brave and right thing to do. And me being sort of new to business, I thought, well, that's probably how it runs, right? This is how you do it. Right? Makes sense.
Good first experience.
So I was like, oh yeah, that's leadership. Okay, they're inspiring, and I want to stick around, and that's great. That was like the human thing to do. And then let's fast forward to, I think it was 2003. Okay. We're now past the first .com boom. As you remember, there was something happening in 2000, 2001. Everything just crashed, basically. Everything fell apart. And in the sort of rubble of a lot of failed companies, internet-based companies, there was a company, and I'll not name anybody to sort of keep the guilty out of it, but there was a company that resurrected by some of the former employees. And as luck or chance would have it, I also started to work with them. And there was a similar situation. A substantial contract just fell through for reasons outside of sort of human agency. It just, a large customer, we just went bankrupt and they couldn't pay. And what basically they did was to coerce or threatened basically every employee to take the same pay cut as them. No. Not really discounting that they had like an exorbitant sort of insane extremely high pay grade because they were the founders. It's like everybody is supposed to like just feel the pain exactly like them. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is not necessarily how I remembered this thing.
Yeah, remembering the situation. Yeah.
This is like, I've been here before, but what? This is weird. And now it's like they're like trying to coerce me into taking this hit. Well, fuck no. So basically, a long story short, I ended up suing them for not paying my wages. And of course, you can imagine how well a company like that would be doing going on if they're like acting like that. So basically, that company folded or was sort of acquired in a sort of a face-saving action later. But I was out, and I basically told them to fuck themselves via a lawyer, and I just moved on.
So what do you feel like it was like the difference between the first group of leaders and the second group of leaders that
they
made
took responsibility? Yeah, I mean, there are people who are conscientious of the context they were in. They had founded a company. They were asking people basically to stick around, and they had hired people that they believed in. And they were willing to take a personal hit or sort of put their skin in the game, if you will. And the other ones were not really willing to put their skin in the game.
And I'm going to ask you like a follow-up question, and I really hope, because I'm taking like a leap of faith, like the initial guys that they paid, they took the cut, they said like, we're staying to gain the more, we also lose the more, and it's natural. Did you keep like in touch with them? Do you know them? Did they succeed with their company, or did they start other companies that
They're
were widely
still
successful?
very successful. They're the market leaders in what they do.
Okay,
Very good.
Europe wide, and the other
guys
company
that
doesn't exist anymore.
yeah, and and did the leaders found like other successful companies or not?
From the second
Beg your pardon, I
company.
didn't
And
understand.
The people from the second company that folded, did they move on to other companies? Did they start new companies? Did they
that are
change their
successful or
ways?
not?
Some of the people were super talented and went on to interesting other jobs, but I don't think they were founding material. I don't think they were like business leader material. So I
So
must
no
be
more
honest. Also,
leadership.
I haven't really paid attention to what they've been doing after I
Okay.
basically told them to fuck off. So, but what I've seen sporadically is that, I mean, in and by themselves, they were not bad people, but it's just that they were really bad business managers. And some of them were super talented at what they were doing, but I don't think they were business people, and I don't think that they were leaders. And I think the sort of, at least the anecdotal stuff that I've seen, that they've been employees again at other companies.
More followers than lead by example types. Okay, that's not a problem.
And that leads like exactly to the next question, like what is your leadership philosophy? Essentially, what makes a business leader be successful?
I think one of the things that really taught me, or really put very present on my mind, was skin in the game. Like, you have to lead by example, right? So if I wanted you to do something, or I want you to follow me into like really bad situations, I need to lead by example, and I need to show that I trust you, I invest in you, I believe in you. And if you don't put actions behind your words, it's meaningless and worthless. You have to put skin in the game. And also, if you want people to work 100%, you need to probably work 200% yourself. You have to really be the example that you want other people to be. And also, I think what I also learned from the first job, and also from other projects that I've been doing myself, is that I have absolutely trust in the people I work with. I have absolute confidence in myself and my people that they can do what we set out to do. And I do not want to micromanage them. I want to enable them to get there, right? So there's a huge difference in how you can achieve getting somewhere. And my philosophy and my approach is to have as great people as you can possibly get to work on the things that you're working on, and then enable them to get where we need to go. So, of course, communication is also very key, but also have absolute faith and trust in those people that they will get there.
Yes, and it's so important to have the trust part. It's not just say it, oh, I trust you. They have, you cannot say it, but if you show them that you trust them, they can feel it. Then it's another dynamic in the whole company. Because I've seen managers that said, I trust my team, and then they stand like behind their shoulders, what are you doing, what are you working? And that's not trusting them. That's micromanagement by saying you're trusting them. It doesn't work that way.
Absolutely not. And also, I think I mean, it's like also time-based. I mean, logging and shit like that, I'm totally against it. It's like, what the fuck? If I'm trusting people to do what they're supposed to do on time and with the quality that we're expecting, why the fuck do I need to monitor what I've been doing or not? It's all just a bullshit lie anyway, what it says in a timesheet. It's like, why? Timesheets are like, idiot. I mean, this for industry 1.0. For factory workers, or for where you have a leadership strategy of like institutionally not trusting your people, which is like is toxic.
I was gonna say that timesheets and something like this is mostly for either production or schedule based jobs, retail, where if the client expects you to be open at 8.1, at 8.1 you better be there, or your employees better be there. But for people working in corporate that have to develop strategies, basically work with their minds, you have to be pretty naive to think that at 5 p.m. once they clock off, their brain shuts off. No, he's thinking about tomorrow's problems in his own free time. When he's taking a shower in the morning, he's thinking about his day. That's work, and you're not paying for that. So yeah, if he's
You
a little
actually
late,
get more value.
yeah, you get more value if you show little trust. But my question for you was, what do you recommend, or what do you do to help your key people earn your trust? Because it's not enough to just give trust blindly, because, well, you know, some people will just take advantage of it. People need to feel like they earned your trust. How do you do that?
Well, first, I try to lead by examples in those cases where when I want something out of other people, I try to do the double of it myself. Just to show that I'm not just expecting you to do things, I'm there. And also knowing that I'm there. And also communication. At least in my experience, communication is like 99% of all the things that a leader should do. It's like maybe 1% course correction, where it's like incentives or like either the whip or the carrot, or you need to do something. But I mean, 99% is communication and just getting the fuck out of the way of competent people being able to do what we're supposed to be doing. So one of the things, I mean, it's super important to I mean, I guess to earn the trust is to enable people to arrive at the goal in their own way, right? To figure out how to best do their own things, and then also to know that you have their back, right? It's like if there's any externalities or internal oppositions or detractors or distractions, that you're there to keep the road clean, to keep their back. I mean, at least in my philosophy, when I was as a manager and then we had like 50 people, was like, try to keep them as satisfied, as happy as possible, doing the things their way to achieve the goals that we are we as a group have been defining. But how we get there, with us, basically, to put it another way, my job is more like would be like making sure that they're happy, that basically they have coffee on the table, to put it like bluntly. There's like helping like out just to make them work as efficiently and as well as possible, and not being distracted by bullshit. So one of the things that was one of the things what's super important for me when we were working a lot about like with, let's say, large contracts and large projects, is that keep the customer away from the developers, for instance.
Yes.
It's like not being distracted by bullshit feature changes or direct communications with someone who just have no idea what they're talking about. So it's like me, I'm the shit filter, basically, as a leader. I'm also supposed to take the shit, right? So it's like you also have to be very conscientious about communicating price and what do you call it, appraisal and being well at positive feedback, also when it comes from other people or for yourself, and also shielding them necessarily from all the bullshit that they doesn't necessarily have any direct influence on. That was my job as a leader, to protect them and insulate them from bullshit.
Did your people know about this? All the protecting you did?
I think some of them did, but it's like, to me, that's not important. I have my internal compass. I think that's also something, well, I don't know if it's directly related to what we're talking about now, but at least on a personal level, I think that's super important to have. It's like an internal guided compass instead of an external guided compass. I couldn't give a shit about if people knew it or not. I just I needed to know that I did it. Yeah. So I'm motivated by my inner compass that may or may never be seen, which is secondary. And sometimes it doesn't have to be seen. You just need to do it. Not trying to get praise, what do you call it? You know, get sort of lauded for something that you did instead of the results.
Yeah, and that's something that we're trying, like, and we're hearing more and more from the people that we're interviewing, that as a leader, you are the facilitator. You're like the grease on the
Hmm.
mechanism.
Hmm.
So it's uh, you're not really essential, but you make everything more smooth and work together better
Have
than if you
Hmm.
weren't there.
Have you ever been to a theater play?
Sure, sure.
Okay, you know they change a lot of things on set. It's not the actors that manage that, but the audience, the clients never see it. Okay, the
Hmm.
actors don't pay attention to it because they're in the role.
Hmm.
That's basically the job of the leader, to facilitate, make a smooth
Hmm.
Behind the
transition
scenes.
behind the scenes from
Hmm.
point A beginning to the final act.
Absolutely. That's very much in line with. I have two analogies. One is like you're somewhere between a producer and a director of a movie, and sometimes you're more the producer, sometimes you're more the director. But I guess my philosophy is trying to be more the producer. Less directing necessary, the better. Um, and then the other analogy I have is like you have a rock band and they need a manager, and the manager is like the guy who's like always there to make sure that everybody is staying healthy and are able to go on tour, and basically that they get paid and they're happy. So
Okay.
it's like the band
So
manager.
you make sure that the money comes in and everybody's protected and can do their job for for the thing you got the money
Yeah,
for.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, basically
So
making sure that they can do what they want to do, and what makes them happy.
exactly. So with that in mind, what would be the top three leadership tips you have for aspiring leaders?
Uh, Over communication. There's a lot of toxic culture when it comes to communication, and a lot of I don't know, bad examples. Maybe it's because of school. Maybe it's because of how business studies are, I don't know, conducted. I have no idea. I have no background in business, formerly from a university or anything. What I have found out, which I'm super fascinated about, is how other more like non-business organizations are dealing with communications, especially the Navy SEALs.
Okay, how do they do it?
Because yeah, I was doing some research back in I think 2010 on decision making, and I stumbled on a book which was quite influential on me. It's as a behavioral psychologist, behavioral economist, which I mean, if you've heard about Daniel Kahneman, there's Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. It's like a super
Oh yes,
duper.
I've heard about him.
Tversky and Kahneman did a lot of interesting research on the human biases and stuff like that. And then there's this other guy, which name escapes me right now, but he and Kahneman also have very interesting discussions because they have fundamentally different views on how this works. And the thing that came up in the book that really influenced me and which I have used since is something that's called the commander's intent. That the problem with what the Navy SEALs were doing earlier was that people were dying because things dynamically changed on the ground, and they were still trying to linearly sort of, in a linear fashion, trying to execute a plan that was already obsolete by the time they hit the ground.
Yes.
So basically, we also know this as agile and waterfall versus waterfall and stuff like that.
It
But
also happens in business every day.
exactly. But what they did was basically to put a framework in that enabled the commander and the people who were supposed to execute the intent of the commander with a fixed briefing or a format for the briefing. Whereas it is the commander will express quite formally the intent of the mission, and it's like, here's the success outcome prioritized. You want this and this and this to happen. But furthermore, it was super important, and it's still super important to tell you tell the people who are supposed to do it what we do not want to happen, undesirable outcomes, right? And
Yes.
then it's a briefing where you say, this is the key objectives in these with these priorities. So there's like number one, you can if you can manage. And then here are the things that we definitely do not want to happen and cannot happen, like civilian casualties or whatever it is in this context, right? and then or any casualties on our side or whatever. But then the people are enabled to think of the best strategies before they set out, and also when they've set out and those plans like fall apart, because they often do when you're in a dynamic situation. They're enabled to start thinking about how to achieve the objectives and avoid the negative outcomes that are not supposed to be happening, instead of having a linear plan. And also there's a principled discussion before they set out. So there's a briefing and then there's questions, right? And then you take dissent, and then you take questions, and then you basically revise if necessary. And then they have a plan, and then you set out, and basically how you achieve that plan is up to the people on the ground.
Yeah. And is this the framework you use in what you're doing?
When I'm working with other people, yes. When I want someone to do something, what I usually do, I formulate it as a commander's intent, where it says why I've been thinking this way, what it is that we need to achieve, and then what we're not supposed to be achieving, what is not important, what we could just ignore, what we do not want to have happen.
Quick question. Do you find that this gives your people the chance to come up or surprise you with even better solutions for the
Absolutely. Sometimes sometimes there are things happening that I would never think of, because I didn't have to think about them. I mean, there were people who are just, basically, I don't even have to think about or know all the stuff that the people could do, because they will have a completely clear framework of what it is that we need to achieve, and they can achieve it exactly how they want to, right? So it's been more than once that I've been quite surprised on what they did to achieve the result.
And that's exactly like so one benefit is that the people are empowered to go out and solve the problems, however it evolves. But the major benefit I see for the leader itself is like you freed your mental resources. You don't have to think for them and try to come up for solution and have your people feel like they're your puppets. Just you say like, this is how you do it step by step, and you go and just do that. If you stray from the plan, it's going to be bad for you. No, it's so hard to think like for everybody in your company, and the more the company grows, the more thing you have to do if you're that kind of a leader. It's not scalable.
I think also it's not your job as a leader to think for the people.
Yes.
I mean, if you're thinking for the people, you need to fire some people because they're not doing their job. I mean, they should be paid to be thinking. Or maybe you should fire the leader because you're doing something very inefficiently.
Yeah. And regarding the Navy SEALs training,
or at the format,
it took some time for this to happen, because the first historical figure that I know of that touched on this problem was Napoleon, who said, if I'm not mistaken, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, which is why
like everybody has a plan before you get punched in the face, like Mike Tyson said.
Yeah. More nicely put. And he was credited with creating the first modern army, because he noticed, well, my soldiers need to have clusters of collaborators moving independently, which means their own supplies, an intent, and be able to follow through any way possible or any way they see fit to get the end goal. And he was very successful for it. A bit on the downside, the pessimistic side, the Napoleonic Wars they're pushing on 200 years now. So it's amazing that to this day, his idea is still not fully implemented. But it also gives, much like he had the chance to conquer a lot and do a lot just because you do the right thing, while your competition is still moving linearly.
Yes. And Vidar, so the first step is communication.
Communication, over communicating. I mean, especially if you're starting out.
All 3 tips are communicate.
Yeah, and also structured. I mean, in a format. It doesn't have to be commander's intent if you think that there's something else that fits better for your needs. But I start with something like a commander's intent and just have a look at it if you're not sort of familiar with it. It especially if you're doing something completely new, where probably things are going to change when people start working on it. Like you're starting with a startup, for instance, like every week, every day can be something new turning up that fundamentally changes everything. So it's a format that enables for that. And also, I think what is super important is to have, as it's like maybe this is like a second thing, is to have like principled discussions, like strong opinions but weakly held. That you have a culture that where you challenge everything and it's open to challenge everything. And nothing is taken for granted, whereas everything is our assumptions. And you have to be able to back it up with data. And so if you have an assumption, you should be able to also formulate a test for this assumption. You should be able to somehow come back with data to see if this assumption is correct or not.
To prove
and also, if you have an opinion on something, then prove it.
Yeah.
And also, if you think that what I'm doing or how I'm doing it or what we're doing is wrong, then you need to speak up. I mean,
if not, you're going to have a cult and not a culture inside your company.
Exactly. And let me tell you, most companies out there, when they reach a certain size, they're just like indistinguishable from cults. It's crazy.
Yes.
So
you hear it about like large companies,
and people are proud of it too.
Yes.
Well, religion makes you interesting, I guess.
That could be a whole separate podcast. I won't even touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Exactly.
Right. So I guess my number two thing would be like be able to take dissent, be able to have a culture. I mean, you should have a culture where you're able to challenge everything, including the boss and the leadership on a regular basis. Also, maybe you should formalize it, whereas you have feedback sessions and there's like a 360 feedback thing going on as often as possible. That is to say, also when you're doing, let's say you're doing software work or something like that, you should have an iteration process that is at least, or at least as short as 1 week before you have like feedback cycles again. If you're taking more than 1 week, you're probably doing something terribly wrong. And the longer the iteration cycles are going, the more damage you're going to be doing and more impossible it's going to be to fix.
That's for sure.
And also when I say, go ahead.
You go, because I want to get your information.
No worries. So also I think a lot of the time where this goes wrong, also with principle discussion or having like a culture where you can question and challenge everything, is that some people like don't know what to do, right? And so if there's dissent, you still need to commit to something, right? Some of the times it leads to inaction or uncertainty. But I mean, I think that's also some of the important skills and important job descriptions of the leader is to say, well, I hear you, I see you, but we're still going to do this and this and that. I mean, someone needs to make a decision in phase of dissent as well. I mean, if there's a lot of people who say we're not going to do this, but you believe in it as a leader, it's also your job to say, well, I hear you. We're going to do this. Exactly. You need to move on. I mean, speed is normally, especially in a startup setting, speed is of the essence. If you start getting sort of bogged down by indecision.
And if you as a leader, you don't get questions, you don't get any opposition, it means either that everyone in the company doesn't care about the company, what's happening there, they're just there because they get some money out of it, and they're apathetic about it, or you're not doing your job to push it and drive the company forward. It's you're not doing, somebody isn't doing his job correctly.
Yeah, and I think that is a perfect segue to what would be my third, not necessarily ranked because it's also super important, but the third advice I would give, or in my own experience, also one of the most important, is that you have to be super duper careful about who you're hiring, because you become who you hire. And also speaking from my experience with companies who are not able to do innovation, for instance, themselves, largely it's because of their HR process, right? They've been selecting for people who are not
Yes.
necessarily innovative for years. And also, if you have people that you just still always need to tell what to do, or they're doing things in a way that isn't the culture or isn't in the way that you're supposed to, or underperforming, I mean, it's your fault. You hire them and you let them stay on for too long. That is really unfair also towards the people who are not really fit for the job that you're seeking, to just drag them along, right? So one of the things that I learned the hard way is that you have to hire super duper slowly and get people the hell out of there as soon as you understand that it's not a fit. Because it's unfair for the people who are already working there, that you will drag someone along that will drag them down. And it's unfair for the person who gets dragged into it, who is not really a fit for either the culture or the task at hand. So it's like a lot of people I've seen, a lot of leaders I've seen, they have the mentality of, we just need to stop some gaps here. And then that's like super, to me, that's like a really red flag of bad leadership, because that means that they don't give a fuck about the people who has to live on both sides of the consequences of that bad hire. They're more interested in just having like middle management shut up about the deficits. So
yes.
What I have like the hard way I learned is that if there's a shortage of manpower and you need people, there's an amazing amount of work you can get done without hiring if you just put people through 200% for a while, including yourself. And of course, I'm not advocating doing that on a regular basis, because they're going to burn out people, and that's unfair on the people as well. But I mean, there are periods where you will definitely be better off not hiring B, C, D, E, F candidates, and just basically make do with what you have for a period of time, just making the most out of resources. And also having people get the hell out of there as fast as possible if they're not a fit. It's super important, because it's toxic to have someone who's just pulling everybody down, or having someone who's, I mean, just thinking about the human aspect of the people who get dragged into a situation where they didn't know that the work situation would be like that, and because you hire them well knowing that they would probably not be a fit. So unfair for the team, unfair for the people you hired, and the net consequence is that you're going to have subpar work, which is not what you want to hire people for. So don't hire if you don't have to, and think twice, because you could probably leverage your resources. Maybe you have to say no to some stuff. Maybe you have to go slower, but you do not want to be left with a bad hire.
Yes, and it's something that you as a leader have to manage, because you don't want to go overboard in either direction. You have to keep around the sweet spot of all those choices and situations. And I think that's also something that, especially like for big companies, because they have this pool of cash that they can access anytime, it actually stops them from being able to innovate, because they can stop whatever constraints is stopping them. They alleviate it really fast with some money, instead of staying in the constraints and forcing them to come up with something new, a new way of doing the work, a new way of achieving the result, because they have the easy way out, the easy button. So is that something that you find out, that's actually having constraints help you innovate faster and be more creative?
Let me take an example here, which, I mean, obviously, yes, this is a no-brainer, absolutely. The more constraints, the more creative you get, definitely. I had no doubt about it. There's so many examples in the world. I'll talk about one example right now, which is very small and very insignificant, but like just puts it on the spot, or like it is an example of how urgency actually drives actions. So let me take you back to, I think it was 2013. I had just quit and stopped and folded the Gauss, the People Magnet app. It was going nowhere fast, and we had disagreements in the founding team, and it was just overdue, because also I had debt and I had credit cards outstanding and taxes pending and God knows what. And I was like, okay, now let's just kill it before it kills me. And then at the same time, where like all the bills were coming in, and I was like getting more and more concerned about how to pay for anything and everything, and sort of, I had been starting, I mean, the company that is now Plus Andersen and Associates, it was sort of in the beginning, and I had sort of an, if you will, a debt plan there, which would probably help at least with some projects to fill the debt. But there was some lag in that, and then also suddenly there was an email where I got invited to Stanford by Steve Blank to receive the training as a sort of a lean startup educator, if you will, lean launchpad educator. And then at the same day, I got a letter in the mail, and it said there's a warrant for your arrest for outstanding Social Security and social insurance, which is illegal not to pay in Germany. And I hadn't been able to because there was no money and a lot of debt, because I've been self-financing. And then it was like, okay, we have a warrant for my arrest. I need in 2 weeks to go to the US. That is to say, how am I going to afford a ticket and how am I going to stay? So basically what I did was to launch a crowdfunding for the whole thing. And it was like within 24 hours, everything was paid for. But I was like, without that thing, and I'm like, this was a very small thing in the history of the universe. But I mean, it's like, if that hadn't happened, I would never have had to do that thing, which was super uncomfortable. It's basically asking other people for money, or come up with an idea how to raise the money in 24 hours. So it would be like not possible at all. I think I have a picture even of my hand with the small change. That was all the money I had left in the whole world at that point.
All the money you had in the world fitted in. And it didn't even cover all your hands.
Exactly. Yeah. All my active, all the liquid assets in one hand. Exactly. Well, and I think it was was less than 10 euros.
Yeah. Well, see, it's funny now, but it wasn't funny going through it.
Yeah.
I can laugh without crying now.
Now, yes, but you know, it's one thing looking back, and it's a totally different thing we're in the moment, living it.
Oh, absolutely. So it's also, I mean, it could have gone the other way, right? It could have ended really badly.
Yeah.
But I think that's where the founder kind of gets defined in you. I mean, either you have it in you or you don't. So I mean, I'm not advocating, to make it clear, I'm not advocating having unfortunate constraints, because that there's no given that there's going to be a positive outcome. But I think it's quite defining if the founding creative side of you comes out or if it doesn't.
So you don't have, the idea is don't put yourself in a situation like give all your money because
that's like, for fuck's sake, don't do anything stupid.
Don't do anything
don't
stupid.
Be as stupid as
like
me.
Create like circumstances that force you to do it, but if it doesn't work, you still have resources to fall on.
Don't be like that Russian author.
Yeah.
I always forget his name.
Yes.
But sometimes you just need to throw yourself out on deep waters and see if you can swim.
Yeah.
Maybe bring a life preserver, but you need to see if you can swim.
So I don't know if it's Dostoevsky or if the story is true, but what I've heard is for him to be able to write a new novel, he would take all the money from the previous novel, he would party it, spend it all until he was almost living like on the streets, to be able to write another novel. Because if he had the money, the comfort, he wouldn't be able to sit down and write anything and create. He didn't have the desperation in him. Don't be like that. Like he created like good works of art, but I don't think it's a good strategy for a good life.
Definitely not a good strategy.
It's
no. It's like that's also what I tell founders, early stage founder, first time founders that are just starting out their own startups. It's like, you're not Steve Jobs. Just stop it already with all the sort of, well, Steve Jobs did that, Steve Jobs did that. There was only one Steve Jobs, and you're not it. So it's like, we're not this Dostoevsky. Whatever worked for him, but there's like zero guarantee, and probably, I mean, the probability that it's going to not work for you is probably 6 sigma high.
Yeah,
exactly.
and besides, you would need to be like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or everybody else. You would need two
which we're
very
not.
important things. Two very important things to be able. You would need a new field, a new domain, like the internet was in the 90s, which doesn't come about every day. It was computers for them, and it was the internet for you, for example. And you need very well connected parents that can take 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old wet behind the ears and introduce to IBM and the US government and big companies, say you can work with this person
to dinner.
yeah
Stuff like that.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which isn't
also,
like mentioned in most books.
Never mentioned in the books.
And I tell you what is also not mentioned, which also leads me to some of the most helpful insights about the world ever. But one of the things that are never mentioned is luck. You know, for all of the Steve Jobses that existed, I can tell you, for instance, Jay Miner and other people who made much better computers like the Amiga, they're forgotten, but they made so much better stuff. It's just that someone survived, someone did something, and maybe the sun and the moon and the correlations of the star signs, God knows what. But what we really underestimate is luck. And we call it survivorship bias, right? We're just discussing the people who survived and were successful. And for each of them who were successful, I mean, look at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. I think there was at least 5 to 8 other Facebooks before Facebook.
High Five, MySpace, and 4 others.
Exactly. Friendster, for instance, 6 Degrees. Well, you know, it's survivorship bias. It's also what do we learn by the people who were successful? We learn that they were successful because we have no controlled experiments. So it's like the scientific correct thing to say is that what we can deduct from their success is that they were successful.
Yeah.
That's it, period. Because we have no control group and we're not running an experiment.
And what I like is, like, I don't know from who said this or what, the quote that I like the most is like, it's the winner's prerogative to write history.
Yeah.
So when you win, this comes like from world history, like when you win a war, you get to write the narrative of what happened and how it happened because you're the winner. So, and it happens in business also. Business winners, they get to choose what story they tell and how it happened. And some of the nasty and gritty stuff gets left out because it's not pretty.
Absolutely.
One question I really wanted to ask you, since you've worked with very big companies and managed people, what do you think about transparency in salaries? Because, you know, in the US and even in Romania, for example, companies they mystify everything and say you have to keep your salary secret and stuff like that. And
it's the same in Germany. It's a very big no-no to ask your colleagues about how much they're earning. I do believe in transparency. I do believe that there's no reason other than evil. I mean, reason by. Let me step that up a step or two. Step back. Let me retract. What I would say is that information asymmetry is usually used for evil in this context. It is to control people and to get as little money to someone as possible, which is bullshit and bad leadership, in my opinion. I mean, a fair price in the market also, that said, is what you can get, right? I'm not a socialist by any stretch. I don't believe that everybody should have the same. I think that's ridiculous. But I do think that transparency helps fairness. And if you're fair and if you're like, if you want to have also by today's standard, have a competitive advantage, why not be transparent? Why not be transparent about anything and everything, right?
Yeah, and then also people can see, like, I want that salary, that person has that salary, they're doing this stuff, if I do that stuff, I'm also going to get the same salary. And
motivates people.
It motivates people to strive for more, or maybe they want
and,
less. Or
and also, what I think a lot of people are not talking about is the effect, or let me retract or go back on that. What I meant is that you should also be a bit worried about having employees that are just interested in the salary. My experience, it's the people who are also more in on the vision and the task at hand that are the people that you consider working with. Because I mean, people who could just, I mean, looking at salaries, I mean, let the competition have them and bleed dry. I mean, I'd rather have someone who's much more dedicated and also is ready to take a sort of a dip or a cut in what the market actually would pay them.
Yeah.
This is also why people start working for startups when they can.
What they're doing. But that means you as a leader have to create a vision that is compelling, that you're doing something that's bigger than just making money. Because if you have a company and the goal is to make money, people are there to make money also.
Yeah, we could be talking about vision for the whole day long. I mean, I think one of the reasons why a lot of companies are so lost is because there's no vision anymore. And also short-term goals, right? The combination of no vision and short-term goals and like public stock markets is like a disaster. But that's a discussion for a whole book.
It's an entire episode.
Moving forward, like I guess that you read a lot, and since you also lectured at universities, I guess you read a lot also. To that.
Well, I think the only reason why I read a lot is because I'm paranoid. I'm paranoid that I will stand still or lose out on something or not develop. I'm super duper afraid of like being ossified or like just sort of like rotting from inside intellectually.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Very familiar.
What is the book that had the most profound impact on you?
There's several. I mean, when I was a kid, maybe too early, my teacher in like first grade gave me the book Watership Down, which is like super dramatic and probably not something like a 6 or 7 year old should be left alone with. But I guess she thought that I was able to handle it. It had a profound effect because it's about animals, but it's like about the realities of the world. So it's quite dramatic and it's sad and so on and so forth. I mean, it's like it helped shape me in a very early age, and more like I guess also opened my eyes to a little bit of things that are you're supposed to sort of think about later in life and not when you're 6 or 7. And then later in life, the most influential books on me was one was the one we talked about, which for the living days, I cannot remember what the
Thinking Slow and Fast, or
that one as well. But the one I read before that one was is it called Gary Klein? I think it's called Gary Klein. Let me see if I can find it. But let's talk about the other one now, which I mentioned, which is Daniel Kahneman and Tversky. Unfortunately, Tversky died before they really had the success that we know now. And also, I think he's the only Kahneman is the only psychologist who got the Nobel Prize for economics. But what basically they did was to identify and isolate all the cognitive biases that we have as human beings, or at least 100 plus of them, which helped me being much more conscientious about what's going on in my mind versus my actions versus my opinions, guiding decisions. So the one that I had in mind before that is by Gary Klein, and it's called Sources of Power: How People Make Decisions.
Okay.
This is the one that turned me on to the Commander's Intent. That one is older. It's from 1999. And it was relatively obscure at the time, but it's also reached a wider audience because Kahneman and Klein have very different opinions on things, but they are very happy to discuss in a very constructive manner. So sort of in a mature way. and also like in a scientific way. So it's like every time I see that they have a discussion somewhere, it's something I would really like to watch or read, because they're moving this field of decision making collectively to a different place, which is amazing.
They understand the distinction between I don't like your ideas, which doesn't mean I don't like you. It's a very clear distinction that got lost, and at least it feels like it got lost in present day society. You don't have to like what I think to like me.
Exactly. I think that somewhere we need to somewhere along the way we need to find back or get back to that, where we can have principled discussion without going ad hominem. Because I think, but that's also a digression we could talk about for a year.
Oh yeah.
Is that the
So,
discussions
really
have
quickly,
been like completely ad hominem by now.
Yes. So Vidar, really quickly, like what would be the major cognitive bias that you see stopping leaders from being good leaders?
But one of the cognitive biases we're not necessarily a bias, but it's ego.
Ego.
So it's basically I don't know, it's a misunderstanding of what it means to be in power, misunderstanding, or maybe insecurity. Maybe it's like male insecurity. I don't know, but maybe it at least it seems that a lot of people have a very strange idea that doesn't jive with my experience of what it means to be a leader or have power. Whereas they're like having I mean, kingdom building, or like information asymmetry, or micromanaging. I mean, all the things that are more towards manipulating people instead of enabling people to pull and do their best possible work. So I think one of the reasons there is that maybe it's ego. I think it's I would say my hypothesis is it's a lot about ego, or how they defined themselves in a leadership position, that this is how leadership's supposed to be.
Something I say a lot is like, leaders are not the people you see in movies portrayed as leaders. It has nothing to do with leadership there. And with each interview, like people that worked with true leaders and are leaders, and say, no, movies are movies, realities, and you're actually a servant. The higher up you move, the more of a servant you become.
Servant leadership. And
absolutely. The more coffees you're serving. That's exactly why
I got the idea, but it really cemented that idea that popular media and stuff like this misshapes and misconstrues our ideas. There was an interview with Steve Jobs, again, about him. He got really popular. I think it was 60 minutes. It doesn't matter. The problem was that it was a very powerful interview amongst C-suite executives, because in the interview he said, I take no prisoners, I don't take no, I tell people how I want it, and this is how I run my company. And it ruined a lot of businesses in the following 5 years, because a lot of people looked at Apple and said, I want that, and if that's how he does it, that's how I'll do it. And they changed overnight, literally changed overnight.
And ruined their business.
Yeah, and I had people on this podcast interview that said, we went through that. It was horrible.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think also that ties back to what we talked about, and what we should probably not open the whoop can of worms right now, about how it turns into religion, right? You could also argue that a lot of religions around the world have forgotten the message and are worshiping only the creeds and the sort of the rituals, right? So basically it's like forgetting the message, or the things that went into Apple and making it successful, and just looking at those superficial sort of rituals, which is also
forms
why
without substance.
It's also I hate agile with a great big with a capital A and Scrum, but that's a discussion for another day, because this is also just rituals and the best way of doing the wrong things the fastest way. But that's a discussion for another day.
Exactly.
I just wanted to drop the bomb.
Yes. And if people want to find out more about you and what you're doing, because it's awesome stuff.
The lesson, I just remember now, there are 2 books that you guys need to read, everybody who's listening, which I forgot, and that would be a disrespect to the author, which is Nicholas Nassim Taleb. Especially the 2 first books that I read was The Black Swan and Fooled by fooled by randomness. I also sort of opened my horizons. Of course, Anti-Fragile is an ode to entrepreneurship, if you will. So check out Taleb if you haven't. He's also very prolific on Twitter. It's very interesting. Very interesting person. Probably one of the biggest, I would postulate is one of the biggest interesting thinkers currently alive. But so yeah, the question was, how can you reach me? Find out more about me. You can go to, for instance, vidarandersen.com. That's Vidar with a V, vidarandersen.com, or just Google me. I also have open office hours for free for entrepreneurs and students. So every week you can also book time with me with no strings attached. So we can talk about your business ideas or the problems you're having in your business.
Awesome. So we'll put in the show notes the address for the website and
the link for the books.
Yes, the links for the books. And also, I highly recommend people to reach out to you. Do you also do like Zoom calls or something like that if more international?
Absolutely. Especially now with the pandemic, it's only by Zoom.
Perfect.
So it doesn't matter where you are in the world.
Especially, reach out to Vidar if
you're
a budding entrepreneur. Yes. Hey, if you're listening to this,
you have internet.
So you can reach out to Vidar and get in contact with him.
Maybe somewhere they're bootlegging it on cassette tape.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
That would actually be really cool.
I would buy the internet for that person.
Sponsor him.
Thank you so much, Vidar, for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and also to you guys listening. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, bye.
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 That was today's episode. Tune in daily. Rate, like, subscribe, and share, please. Oh, you can find further info and materials in the show notes on techyleadership.com, including links to the guest book recommendations.